So I think it's fair to say the Canadian Grand Prix was a bit of a confusing one in this stewards room. I was actually up till gone 1 AM on UK time on race day just to try and figure out who's getting a penalty for what, when's what going to be announced, and it took me a while to work it out. So in this video, we're going to summarise the 75 FIA documents they released over the Canadian Grand Prix weekend, 23 of which we're going to look at because they are the stewards infringements, and every single car in the entire grid is featured at some point in these documents. So straight away, let's tick off 11 of them then, nice and quickly. 4 of them were pit lane speeding. You had Piastri, Albon and George Russell twice, all of which sped by 0.3 kilometers an hour or less, all got a €100 fine per one. You've also then got going too slowly in quali, which is actually every single driver apart from Max Verstappen. They set a minimum time in qualifying between safety car line 1 and safety car line 2 of 1 minute 21, and every single driver bar Max Verstappen went slower than that at some point. But the stewards basically let them all get away with it because they basically said that every single one of them was just doing it to make sure they didn't impede a driver behind them. So what I'm hearing is basically the minimum delta was a bit too slow, but Max Verstappen is definitely a bit of a stickler for the rules. And then you've got not following the race director's instructions. Now, this is basically a document that the FIA released at the start of race weekend detailing what the race director expects of people. Now, there was 2 separate ones in this. There was 3 total infringements, but 2 separate different things, should we say. So one of which was turn 14, which is the penultimate chicane on the track. Basically, there was an orange line there and they had to stay to the left of the orange line, and 2 people didn't do that. One was George Russell, that was in practice 2. He got a warning for not doing it. And then it was Ollie Bearman actually in the race, but he also only got a warning. They basically deemed in the race one that if Ollie Bearman actually avoided the orange line, he would have come across the racing line or back onto the track at a bit more of an extreme angle. So they actually decided it was probably safe for him to do so, but obviously he could have slowed down and done something differently. But just a very minor infringement, they both got warnings. The other one is not staying right in qualifying between turns 12 and 13 into the straight directly before that corner we just mentioned there. So this was something that was actually added to the race director's notes after the initial race director's notes were released. And they basically said that in qualifying, drivers should stay right down that little straight so that drivers on a hot lap couldn't go left around them. And Ocon didn't do that. Simple as that. He went left instead of right as instructed, and he got a reprimand for it, which is his first this season. He basically just said that he was just making sure he was keeping out of the way, and he did so, and just a very minor one. You've also got some parc fermé changes. So there's, of course, a pit lane start for both Gasly and Lawson. So there was those 2. Gasly took his 3rd instance of his energy store and control electronics. Lawson took his 5th combustion engine, turbocharger, MGUH, and his 3rd energy store and control electronics. So basically everything, and also changed his suspension. So in changing those parts, they both had to start from the pit lane. You've also then got, the last of the quick ones, qualifying impeding. We all know about this one. Isaac Hadjar impeded Carlos Sainz very clearly in qualifying and took a 3-place grid drop for it. So there's the 11 quick ones out of the way straight away, but we've still got 12 more to go through. So the first of those then is overtaking under the red flag. Now there's a red flag in practice 3 and 2 people overtook during it. Gabriel Bortoleto and Yuki Tsunoda. Starting with Bortoleto then, he was going 325 kilometers an hour on the back straight when the red flag was called. He slowed down within 0.6 seconds of the red flag being called, so very, very quickly. But as that happened, Bearman was only 57 metres ahead of him and going much slower. He actually braked and tried to avoid overtaking, but just couldn't do it in time. Overtaking was essentially unavoidable. Maybe if we went full brakes and locked up, maybe he could have stopped it. But just like in the UK, when you have an amber light on a traffic light, it was just not really possible. So no further action on that one. But then, of course, we've got Yuki Tsunoda, who did take a 10-place grid drop for overtaking under the red flag in practice 3. This one a bit more serious. He also got 2 penalty points, by the way, which takes him to a total of 2 across a 12-month period. This one's a bit more serious. So basically, Piastri had damage. That's what caused the red flag. Tsunoda came up to him on the same back straight as before with Bortoleto and went past him. Apparently, Piastri was doing 86 kilometers an hour. Tsunoda was doing 171 kilometers an hour. They were on opposite sides of the straight, as in one was left, one was right, and overtook him. And Tsunoda didn't like that. Tsunoda basically said that, well, if I sat behind him, I was worried I was going to get hit by debris or something. I could clearly see he had a car issue, so I just went past him. And obviously, in those situations, you are allowed to overtake. If someone's literally stopped on the side of the track because their engine's died, of course you're allowed to overtake them. But the stewards deemed that that was not enough. They said he was doing, because he was still doing 86 kilometers an hour, that Tsunoda actually could have just followed a safe distance, maybe 100 meters or more back, and just gone the same speed as him. It's not like he was doing 5 kilometers an hour. So the stewards disagreed. Honestly, for this one, I think this one would be really up to opinion. I think this is probably quite harsh. But clearly the stewards have shown with this call and with the call in Monaco a while ago that they expect you to not overtake really under any circumstances unless you've got a very, very, very good reason for doing so. So yeah, 10th place grid drop for Yuki, quite harsh. Should have started P11, ended up starting at the back of the grid. And then you've got another one, which I'm sure you guys all know about. This is forcing another driver off the track by Lance Stroll during the race. They gave him a 10-second penalty for this one. Pretty slam dunk. He got 2 penalty points for it, which takes him to a 5 total over 12 months. Coming to the final chicane, he defended and then went back over the line and pushed Pierre Gasly off the track. Really an open shut case. I think no one was really surprised to see that penalty. But now we get to the slightly more controversial ones, and the ones I think you guys may be less aware of. So first up, you've got Lando Norris for causing a collision. Of course, he hit Oscar Piastri, took himself out of the race. Now, Lando was actually given a 5-second penalty for this, which is quite surprising. Normally, collisions between teammates, the stewards don't tend to step in. I guess it did cause a safety car. It did cause, debris to have to be cleaned up and things like that. But still, Norris put himself out of the race. There was no negative effect for Piastri. I'm kind of surprised to see this punished, but look, he did cause a collision. He drove straight into the back of his teammate. So they decided to give him a 5-second penalty. Now, the bit that a lot of people are unsure of is why that wasn't carried over to the next race. Because normally, if you don't take a time penalty, during a race, that gets converted to a grid drop for the next race, which has not happened for Lando Norris. The reason is he was technically classified. If an F1 car does more than 90% of the race distance, they are classified as a finisher, even if they DNF. And of course, Lando was. So technically, on paper, he finished the race. So they added 5 seconds to his race time, which of course has done absolutely nothing for his finish position, and he got away with it. If it happened a bit earlier in the race, before the 90% point, he probably would have got a penalty that would have carried over to the next race. So I'm not going to call it lucky. I think it was relatively harsh for the stewards to give a penalty in this circumstance, but that is why it wasn't carried over to the next race. Next up then, we have got 7 safety car infringements, which happened at the end of the race when the safety car was called. So the first of which is erratic driving by Esteban Ocon, just a single one there, which they deemed no further action. Basically, Ocon slowed down massively on the pit exit and Sainz very nearly hit him. You may have seen a replay of this. Sainz had to take to the grass and just about avoided hitting him, but it was very close. So it seemed quite erratic, like he jammed on the brakes, almost like a brake check. But basically, the steward said that there was still a double wave yellow in turns 1 and 2 from Norris's car being recovered. And basically what happened is Ocon got a audible warning in his ear and his wheel lit up to say that there was a double wave yellow. Apparently that also triggers a delta warning on the wheel. So basically he would have just been aware there's double wave yellow, just decided to slow down a lot, possibly even had an actual delta that he was over, going too quickly in that section, particularly because of the way the pit exit works, and just slowed down a lot because of it. Was it erratic? Yeah, maybe, but I think this one's okay. Sainz didn't hit him at the end of the day. It didn't make any difference to the race. It looked a bit dodgy on the replay, but actually this one was fine in my opinion. Next up, we have got 6 instances of overtaking under the safety car. Now that sounds bad, but it was after the checkered flag. So there were 6 drivers that did this: Antonelli, Piastri, Ocon, Leclerc, Sainz and Gasly. So quite a few big names there. Now, basically, the checkered flag have flown, and obviously normally after the checkered flag, the drivers, overtake each other, whatever. They just get back to the pits in whatever pace they feel like doing and no problem. But because the safety car was still technically out, because Norris's car was still, in theory, being recovered, there was a safety car panels. They're all lit up. You're not supposed to overtake. And actually, Max Verstappen, being the stickler for the rules that he is, he was sat there going, I'm not overtaking. He's coming with the radio going, everyone's overtaking. What's going on? Because you're not allowed to do it. Even if the checkered flag has flown, if there's a red flag or a safety car, you don't know. Someone might have spun off on the cool down lap into the wall and be blocking the track. There's a reason that these yellow flags and safety cars and stuff still exist even after the checkered flag. Now, all of the drivers here got away with just a warning. Definitely could have been worse. You are not allowed to overtake under the safety car. We've seen how harsh they are with overtaking under red flag, even in practice sessions. So for them to overtake under what is technically a safety car, even after the checkered flag, I think they got away lightly with this. I'm not saying it's the wrong decision, because I think, let's be honest, it's made no difference. It's just a warning. They all, I guess, a lot of time at the end of the race, all the stewards wave the flags and stuff anyway. Like, normally they overtake. I get it. I do get it. But fundamentally, they overtook under a safety car. It just happened to be one that was after the checkered flag, or still existing after the checkered flag. So, yeah, all a warning. Nothing more than that. I do think this was ultimately the right decision, but I think with us being so harsh about overtaking under red flags, maybe this one should have been something else. But anyway, they all got away with it. And finally then, the 23rd Stewards investigation that they did for the Canadian Grand Prix weekend is, of course, Red Bull's protest. Now, Red Bull, about an hour after the race, protested George Russell and Mercedes. They basically protested on the grounds of erratic driving behind the safety car and unsportsmanlike conduct on track. So, what they claimed was that Russell braked just to make Verstappen overtake him under the safety car. He also then complained over the radio saying Max just overtook me, which they're claiming was unsportsmanlike. They also claimed that it must have been obvious to him that the race was going to end under the safety car, so why would he need to brake to warm up his tyres? That's what Red Bull claimed. Now, Mercedes countered by saying that the safety car was very slow and it bunched at the field, which was true. If you watch the replay a bit before what was broadcast on the replay on the main broadcast, the safety car is really slow down the straight. You see George Russell gesticulating, you see Max Verstappen also gesticulating. For some reason, the safety car was cooling down the straight, so it bunched them back up. Mercedes also said that periodic braking is normal under safety cars to keep your brakes warm. Like, it's not unusual to jam on the brakes at points. He also said that the reason he looked in his mirrors and looked back for Max Verstappen was to check that Verstappen wasn't right behind him when he did it, rather than to check that he was alongside to make him overtake. He also applied 30 psi of pressure, which is not severe braking. It's not a big brake test. They also said it's not the car in front's job to look out for the car behind. Although George Russell did do that, looking in his mirrors, that's not really his job. If Max went into George Russell, regardless of whether it's because he's warming his brakes or not, that would be on Max. They also said that the radio call from George Russell to his team about Max overtaking him was just factual. I mean, I guess you can't really deny that. It was just factual. They also said that they didn't actually report it to the race director. They didn't, go to the race director and say, hey, Max should get a penalty, he just overtook us. They also said that they didn't know that this for sure, that the safety car would end, or the race would end under the safety car. And they also said, this is the best part, that Verstappen did exactly the same thing on other laps on the exact same straight. Warmed up his brakes in the straight, jammed on the brakes in the straight. So lots of countering there for Mercedes, trying to cover all their bases. And in the end, the stewards basically dismissed the appeal. They just said, go away. I think this is the right decision, honestly. I completely get it to some extent from Verstappen's fans, how it looks like George Russell looked at his mirror, then jammed on the brakes, Max overtook him, and then George went, oh, Max just overtook me. Like, I get it, especially after his comments after qualifying about Max's penalty point, which I thought was very humorous. But also, the safety car is what bunched them up. And I did actually think before George jammed on his brakes, I did think, whoa, why is Max so close? Like, what is he doing? It was because of the safety car being so slow, but I did wonder why he was so close. So, but then George still has to, warm up his brakes. So he did it. Yeah, okay. He probably shouldn't have moaned that Max overtook him over the radio. Fine. But it was factual. They're not wrong. And Mercedes didn't report it directly to the race director. So, maybe say something like Max is a bit close to me or something would make more sense. So, yeah, fine. A little bit snaky in that, I guess. But ultimately, nothing came of it anyway, and rightly so. I do believe Mercedes. I think George was just trying to warm his brakes up. He also went more than 10 car length at one point, but that just happens all the time. Modern F1, that's a rule that's just not enforced and arguably should be changed. Every single driver at some point under a safety car goes more than 10 car lengths back. That wasn't even directly part of the appeal, that was just part of the whole thing. So I don't think George did anything malicious. Look, why would he? There's a safety car at the end of the race. He's about to win the race, probably. Why would he risk getting a penalty? It doesn't make any sense. You know what I mean? So I'm honestly surprised Red Bull protested this. It's a bit much, isn't it? As much as it's a little bit snaky from George to mention that over the radio, I think it's more snaky for Red Bull, honestly, to protest all this. But look, let me know what you guys thought of all this down in the comments. It's definitely a little bit controversial that Red Bull protested it. I'm glad the stewards didn't get involved because I think that was the right decision in the end. But look, every single driver at some point was mentioned in those notes. The only time that Max Verstappen was mentioned was because they Red Bull protested on Max's behalf. Max was the only driver not featured in anything else, which is quite impressive. So look, he's a stickler for the rules. But just before you head off, there's a few other interesting tidbits that I found in these 75 FIA documents they released. First of all, who took a new power unit this weekend? Mercedes, and were much better form, and Ferrari, who maybe weren't much better form. Alonso also took a new power unit, who was also up there a bit more. So clearly, I think a fresh engine does still do something in F1, even in a high reliability era. And also the changes in Parc Fermé. They are allowed to change parts in Parc Fermé if they're a like for like and, to replace damage and things like that. The most obvious one is Alex Albon. Obviously, his engine cover blew off. They can obviously replace the engine cover in that case. He's not going to start the race without an engine cover. They also replaced both side pods. They replaced the left rear suspension, the left water radiator, and the left and right rear suspension fairing. So quite a lot of damage there from that engine cover blowing off. Lando Norris replaced his front left suspension. Leclerc replaced the fuel cell air pump. Verstappen replaced the steering rack. Alonso also replaced the steering rack along with Stroll. Alonso also replaced his right rear brake drum. Stroll also replaced his track rod shroud. Colapinto replaced his clutch and his rear transponder fairing. And Bem replaced his CTE engine wiring harness. No idea what that is. Your guys' guess is as good as mine. But anyway, guys, let me know if you did enjoy this video. A bit of analysis on what happened in the stewards room. This was, again, really triggered by me just being interested, going, but what happened with all those things? Like, what was the reasoning? Looking on sites like motorsport.com and just not really getting the answers I wanted. I was like, you know what? Let's make a video. So if you enjoyed it, do drop a sub. Let me know in the comments as well if you enjoyed it, because I will keep making this kind of thing if it's popular. And I will catch you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.